St. Patrick, patron saint of Ireland, and quite an interesting guy. He's actually not Irish. He's British. His family was from Britain and lived in Britain. They actually lived on the west coast of Britain in kind of a villa. His family was fairly well off. And when he was 16, as his own autobiography goes, when he was 16, his area was invaded by Irish raiders. And he, not his parents, but he and some others who worked on their farm were captured and taken west back to Ireland. At that time it was kind of savage. It was the Druids and it was all of this kind of pagan world over there. And he was taken back there. He was taken captive and a slave. He was working as a herdsman on a field of a landowner. He had faith. His family was a family of faith, and so he had the seeds of faith in his life. But he says in his own confession, his own story, that it didn't become his own until he was a slave on these farms. He says that he did not have anything to do except pray as he worked. And so as he prayed, being a herdsman, he said that God showed up to him, that God spoke to him, that God reassured him, and that God gave him strength. So it was during that period of time, literally on his own, that he really, we would say, gave his life to Christ. And that's the equivalent of what happened to him. It was so much so that he earned a reputation with a lot of his fellow slave workers on the land. They called him Holy Boy. Because all he did was he walked around praying, and he obviously prayed out loud, and that's just what he did all the time. He's like, that's the Holy Boy over there. That's who he became. After 6 years, he heard God distinctly tell him, escape and go back home. So he did, and 100 or 200 miles of walking, and then he found a ship, and he convinced the captain to take him across. It took him 2 years. Wow. And it's not very far from Ireland to England, but it took him 2 years because of all kinds of problems. When they were on the ship, they ran out of food. And the captain actually asked Patrick, can your God do anything about this? And Patrick said, let's pray, he can. So he prayed, and there was a pack of pigs that was not there before. And so they feasted on the pigs, the story goes, for several days, and they never ran out of food again on the rest of their journey. Patrick comes home, and after he's home, he's settling in at home, and he has a dream. And in his dream, he is reading a letter, and it's entitled From the Voice of the Irish. And from this letter, he starts hearing the voices of the Irish people calling him to go back to them. Patrick did what any of us would probably do. He ignored the dream and said, that's not for me. He also thought, if God is calling me to the Irish, I feel ill-equipped to do that. So he went to school, and he went to school to become a priest and a bishop. 15 years of school he went to, and after those 15 years, he finally decided, God is calling me and I feel ready. So he goes back to Ireland. He goes back to the landowner who was his captor. He goes back to him to share the message of Jesus. And he goes to him, he shares the message however he did, and his Druid, pagan, savage Irish kind of captor, he locks himself in his own house, he sets his house on fire, and he prays to his own God to save him. Meanwhile, Patrick is outside pleading with the guy, and that's all that happens. And Patrick moved on somewhere else. These are the kinds of experiences that Patrick had. It was not just all shamrocks and good news. It was tough. I mean, he had contests with pagan gods. He had somebody try to throw a spear at him, and it narrowly missed him and got his chariot driver instead. I mean, he had a tough time where he was tested time and time again. Patrick actually wrote this in his confession. He wrote, "As every day arrives, I expect either sudden death or deception, or being taken back as a slave, or some such other misfortune. But I fear none of these, since I look to the promise of heaven, and have flung myself into the hands of the all-powerful God, who rules as Lord everywhere." He was convinced that this was the message that he needed to bring to the Irish people. His life was a battle. I mean, his life was a battle against these pagan gods. His life was a battle against these people who disagreed with him. His life was probably an internal battle with God. Are you really calling me to this? Because this is not easy. Our life is a battle too. We are battling constantly with trends and crazes around us that are attracting us to them. Our life is a battle of where do I go? Which decision do I make? Our life is a battle of who do I help and how do I help them? Our life is a battle of what's the wise thing to do here? Our life is a battle of where am I going to be in 5 years? And what am I going to be doing? We've got battle after battle after battle that we're fighting. The Bible has language of battle in it. You know, there's so many stories of real-life battles, of soldiers going out, armies going out, one against another, armies facing off against each other, soldiers dressing up, people going on horseback and chariots racing. There are all kinds of battles that happen throughout the Bible. But there's also another kind of battle that the Bible describes. It's not a physical, in front of us, soldiers fighting with weapons kind of battle. It's a bigger battle. It's a battle that's a bit otherworldly. It's a battle that we don't sometimes know how to describe or talk about very well. But it's a battle that the Bible does testify to that is very real. As we've been reading through Ephesians, we're nearing the end of it, and this is how the end of Ephesians describes this battle. It says, "For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places." This is a deep battle. And if this seems distant to us sometimes, let's see how close to home it really is. You're talking with somebody and somebody says something hurtful to you. And your instant reaction is to defend, or to retaliate, or to say something back. And that quickly introduces them doing the same thing back to you. And then it becomes this war, and then it becomes emotional, and then it becomes a choice of, am I going to say the wise thing because I'm striving to follow Jesus and be a good, faithful follower, or am I just going to rant and let it out? There's a spiritual level to this battle all of a sudden. Think about trying to make a decision where I list my pros and my cons. I have my idea of what is smart, what I'm capable of, what is just not a good idea, and what is just not good for me. But then there's a whole new level of what is God calling me to? What is God leading me to do? What makes sense according to how God has gifted me? What is creating barriers against me doing this? And then all of a sudden this becomes bigger than just, should I do it? This introduces a whole new realm of what is happening in the decision that I'm trying to make. So many levels, in so many ways, the battles that we face, the questions, the decisions, the things that happen, are at a level beyond what we tend to just see and sense. There is a spiritual battle going on that has eternity at stake. It has our minds and our attention involved. It has our hearts and our emotions so wrapped up in it. It has our bodies and our behavior and the things we do. It has our souls and our eternity even at stake in this. I mean, this is a deep battle that is raging constantly. So what do we do? How do we fight? How do we respond to this kind of battle? Ephesians says how to respond. it describes what do we have available to us? What can we do? What can we muster in order to fight this battle that is going on? We can fight it with things around us, or maybe there's more. And the more is what Ephesians tries to show us. Keep in mind, this is the last section in Ephesians. This is like a speaker is speaking and has been speaking for a while, and then they say, now, just to wrap up. This is the end of what Paul is writing. It's his final word. So, here's what he says. A final word. Be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on all of God's armor so that you will be able to stand firm against all strategies of the devil. For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. Therefore, put on every piece of God's armor so you will be able to resist the enemy in the time of evil. Then, after the battle, you will still be standing firm. Stand your ground, putting on the belts of truth and the body armor of God's righteousness. For shoes, put on the peace that comes from the good news so that you will be fully prepared. In addition to all of these, hold up the shield of faith to stop the fiery arrows of the devil. Put on salvation as your helmet and take the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Do you notice the tone? Just overall, not so much the details, but just the overall tone of this. When an army goes into battle, they're usually going to feel one of two ways. They might feel ready and confident and set up for success and knowing that they're going to win. That we're going to win this battle. The other way they might feel is, this is not going to go well. I'm scared. I'm concerned. Which of those two? Confident that this is going to go well, or really worried about this not going well? Which side is this describing? Yeah, this is confident. This is super good. You're going to stand firm. You're going to endure. You're going to last. This is hopeful about being able to last through this battle. But Paul also describes how big this battle is. Powers of the unseen world. We're no match for powers of the unseen world. I don't even know what they are or what they look like. He's talking about otherworldly, big kinds of things, that the devil and demonic forces and enemies. These are huge things that I don't even know what to do with them. But Paul is saying, you're going to stand firm in this. We're going to be able to last. We're going to get through this. And in the end, after the battle, we're going to still be okay. How does Paul be so confident that that's the case? He basically says, we need not worry about this battle. You and I don't have to worry, no matter how big it is, no matter how scary it might seem, no matter how unknown it is. We don't need to worry about this battle. Why? Why does he say we don't need to worry? Is it because you and I are really good soldiers? That we are such expert trained fighters? That we've been through years of training, we've come up through the ranks, and we are good to fight? Is that what he says? No. It's because he mentions over and over that we are putting on God's things. It's because of God's presence and God's power and God's resources and God's armor. God's abilities are what we rely on in order to fight this battle. We're hopeless on our own, but we're hopeful with what God provides for us. It's God's strength that will get us through. And I love that Ephesians is specific. I love that this isn't one of those times, where somebody might say to you, hey, you're going through a tough time. I know, but just trust. Just trust. Just believe. Just hope. What do you mean hope? How do I believe and how is it going to get better? It's true, but it's also just so not specific. Paul gets so specific. He says, put on the armor of God. Okay, what armor? Put on, this belt, this helmet, this breastplate, these shoes. Put all of it on. Cover yourself from head to toe in all of these armor-related things so that you will be able to stand firm. So when he says, you don't need to worry about the battle, he's not saying there's nothing we need to do. He's saying we don't need to worry and we need to be prepared. There is a need for us to prepare for this battle. We have stuff to do. Because without the preparation, we probably should worry. But with the preparation, we don't need to worry as much about this battle. This is not the first time that armor comes up in the Bible. Back 700-ish years before Paul, the prophet Isaiah was doing Isaiah's work. And as we've looked at Isaiah a number of times, especially during Advent season, we've noticed that Isaiah's job was a prophet, and he had a very tough job. His job was to tell the people why things were not going well for them. People were getting sick, people were getting captured, people were being exiled, it was terrible, and he had to explain to them, well, why is this all happening? And his answer to them was, well, you're not being faithful. You're not living the way that God wants you to live. And it was basically an issue of sin. The people were sinning, and Isaiah is saying, you're sinners, and God doesn't like it. So you're going to be exiled. So then Isaiah moves on, and he continues to describe what God's going to do about this, how God's going to fix this. Can you guess what kind of metaphor Isaiah might be using for the method that God will introduce to discipline the people, to correct them, to fix this problem? Maybe like the image of battle. He does. It's battle imagery. Like God is going to battle the sin out of them. God is going to fight it out of them. And then Isaiah continues even more, and he describes that God, as the one who is going to battle this out of them, God is going to get dressed up like a soldier to battle this out of them. And can you guess what God might be putting on in order to be a soldier and battle this out of them? Maybe some armor? Right! God puts on the armor. This is what Isaiah says. He says, God put on righteousness as his body armor and placed the helmet of salvation on his head. He clothed himself with a robe of vengeance and wrapped himself in a cloak of divine passion. This is not the only place in Isaiah. There's some more where this whole armor idea comes up. These are God's resources that God has used before to fight the same battle as we fight. And we get God's previously used resources that have worked. And we get to don those resources that are going to work again. God has been there before, and God knows how to win the battle. Take a look at the specific things that God tells us to put on. These different pieces of body armor. If anybody ever said that following Jesus in the Christian life is just a bunch of ideas, and just a bunch of feel-good sorts of things, and it just sort of gives you a sense of things are going to be okay, I don't think they've read these verses. Salvation actually strengthens us. A belt brings truth that we can rely on and stand firm in. The sword of the Spirit we use to fight off things that could threaten us. Reading the Bible actually helps us to fight off things that are not good for us. Our faith can shield us from things that can cause us harm. The good news of Jesus in our lives and bringing salvation, that makes a difference. I mean, all these things are tangible and real when we put them on and claim them as things that can change how we see the world other people, our situation, our decision, and the things happening. Put on this full armor of God to clothe us from head to toe, to cover us, to protect us, and to equip us to be able to fight perhaps the deepest battle that is there. God has been there before. God has fought this battle, and God invites us to use the same things to fight our own battles. Would you pray?